Sarah Martinez had always been different from other women in her small hometown of Cedar Falls. At 32, she carried herself with a quiet confidence that came from years of military training and combat experience. Most people in town knew her as the friendly woman who ran the local auto repair shop, but few knew about her 8 years serving as a special forces medic in Afghanistan and Iraq. The evening started like any other Tuesday. Sarah was closing up her garage when she noticed the black sedan that had been parked across the street for the past hour. 3 men sat inside, and something about their body language made her instincts kick in. Years of training had taught her to read situations quickly, and this one felt wrong. She finished locking up and walked to her truck, keeping her movements casual while staying alert. The sedan's engine started as soon as she pulled out of the parking lot. Sarah took a roundabout route home, making several unnecessary turns through the quiet residential streets. The black car followed at a distance, confirming her suspicions. Her small house sat at the end of a dead-end street, surrounded by tall oak trees that provided privacy, but also made it isolated. As she pulled into her driveway, Sarah noticed the sedan had stopped at the corner, its occupants watching her every move. She parked and walked to her front door, fishing for her keys while mentally cataloging every possible escape route and defensive position around her property. Inside her house, Sarah moved through her evening routine, but kept the blinds drawn and stayed away from windows. She changed into dark clothing and retrieved a small tactical bag from her bedroom closet. The bag contained items most people would never think to keep at home, but Sarah had learned long ago that preparation could mean the difference between life and death. Around midnight, she heard the soft crunch of gravel in her driveway. Sarah moved to a window and carefully peered through a gap in the blinds. 3 figures were approaching her house, moving with the deliberate stealth of people who meant harm. The moonlight caught the glint of metal in one man's hand, confirming what she already suspected. These men had not come to talk. Sarah's military training took over completely. She moved through her house with practiced silence, turning off lights and creating the impression that she had gone to bed. Her heart rate remained steady as she positioned herself in the hallway, where she had clear sightlines to both the front and back entrances. She controlled her breathing and waited. The first man reached her front porch and tested the door handle while his companions moved around to the back of the house. Sarah could hear their whispered communications and the soft scrape of tools against her door locks. These were not random burglars. They moved with too much coordination and had too much equipment. Someone had sent them specifically for her. As the minutes passed, Sarah ran through possible reasons for the attack. Her mind went to Marcus Webb, a local businessman she had refused to sell her garage to 6 months earlier. Webb had connections to some unsavory people and had made increasingly aggressive offers for her property. When she continued to refuse, his tone had become threatening. The back door lock clicked open first. Sarah heard the soft footsteps of someone entering her kitchen, while the other 2 continued working on the front door. She adjusted her position slightly, making sure she could engage threats from multiple directions. The intruder in her kitchen was moving slowly, probably trying to locate her bedroom. Sarah's breathing remained controlled as she prepared for what was coming. She thought briefly of her time in Afghanistan, where situations like this had been a regular occurrence. The difference was that back then, she had a team of soldiers backing her up. Tonight, she was completely alone against 3 armed men who had underestimated exactly who they were dealing with. The kitchen intruder was getting closer to the hallway where she waited. Sarah could hear his careful footsteps on her hardwood floor and see the faint beam of a small flashlight moving along her walls. In moments, he would round the corner and discover that his intended victim was not the helpless woman he had expected to find. The first intruder rounded the corner into Sarah's hallway exactly when she expected him to. In the darkness, he never saw her coming. Sarah moved with the swift precision of someone who had neutralized threats in much more dangerous situations than a small-town home invasion. Within seconds, the man was unconscious on her floor, his weapon secured. Sarah dragged his body into her bedroom and quickly zip-tied his hands and feet with restraints she kept in her tactical bag. She grabbed his radio and listened to the chatter between his 2 companions, who were still working on the front door. Their conversation revealed that they had been hired to send her a message about selling her business. But their casual discussion of what they planned to do to her made it clear this was meant to be much more than intimidation. Moving back to her position in the hallway, Sarah waited for the next phase of their break-in. The front door finally gave way, and she heard 2 sets of footsteps entering her living room. The men were no longer trying to be quiet, apparently confident that they had caught their target off guard. One of them called out for their missing partner, but Sarah remained perfectly still. The 2 remaining intruders split up to search her house. One headed toward the bedrooms while the other began checking the basement. Sarah had positioned herself to intercept whoever came down the hallway first. Years of close-quarters combat training had taught her how to use darkness and confined spaces to her advantage. The second man appeared in the hallway, holding a pistol and calling softly for his unconscious partner. Sarah let him get within arm's reach before striking. The man never had a chance to raise his weapon or call for help. She disarmed him efficiently and used a sleeper hold that left him unconscious within seconds. 2 down, 1 to go. Sarah secured the second intruder the same way she had the first, then moved to locate the third man who was searching her basement. She could hear him moving around below, apparently growing frustrated at not finding anyone. His radio crackled with attempts to contact his partners, but Sarah had turned off their devices. Moving to the basement stairs, Sarah descended silently. The third intruder was standing near her water heater with his back to the staircase, still searching for signs of where she might be hiding. This man was larger than the other 2 and carried what appeared to be a rifle. Sarah realized this was probably their leader, the one meant to deliver whatever message Marcus Webb had paid them to send. Sarah approached from behind, but the floorboard creaked under her weight. The man spun around, bringing his rifle up toward her. For a split second, they faced each other in the dim basement light. The man's eyes widened as he realized he was not looking at a terrified victim, but at someone who moved and carried herself like a trained soldier. The confrontation lasted only moments, but those moments revealed everything about the difference between a hired thug and someone with real combat experience. The man hesitated, perhaps finally understanding that he and his partners had walked into a situation they were completely unprepared for. Sarah did not hesitate. She closed the distance between them before he could properly aim his rifle. Years of hand-to-hand combat training took over as she disarmed him with movements that were both efficient and decisive. The man found himself on the ground, weaponless and facing someone whose calm demeanor in a violent situation told him everything he needed to know about her background. Unlike his unconscious partners upstairs, this man remained awake as Sarah secured him with zip ties. He stared at her with a mixture of fear and confusion, finally beginning to understand that whatever Marcus Webb had told them about their target had been completely wrong. Sarah retrieved his rifle and checked it carefully, noting that it was loaded and ready to fire. The man tried to speak, probably hoping to negotiate or explain, but Sarah cut him off with a look that promised serious consequences if he made any noise. She had 3 intruders secured in her house, and now she needed to decide what to do with them. Her military training had taught her about interrogation techniques, and she had some questions that needed answers before she involved the local police. Sarah moved all 3 intruders to her living room, where she could keep them together and under observation. 2 remained unconscious, while the third, the apparent leader, watched her every movement with growing unease. She had arranged them in a line against her wall, all properly restrained and disarmed. Their weapons lay on her coffee table like evidence in a courtroom. She pulled up a chair and sat facing the conscious man, studying him with the same analytical approach she had used when questioning captured insurgents overseas. The man was probably in his 30s, well-built but soft around the edges, like someone who relied more on intimidation than actual fighting ability. His clothes were expensive but practical, suggesting he was paid well for this kind of work. Sarah spoke quietly, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to getting answers. She asked who had hired them and what exactly they had been instructed to do. The man remained silent at first, probably hoping his partners would wake up and help him figure out how to handle this unexpected reversal of roles. When Sarah retrieved one of their weapons and began field stripping it with the casual expertise of someone who had done this thousands of times, the man's resolve began to crack. She worked methodically, laying out each component while explaining how each part functioned and what kind of damage the weapon could inflict. Her tone remained conversational, almost educational, which somehow made it more unsettling than any threat would have been. The man finally started talking when Sarah mentioned that she recognized the rifle model from her time overseas, where it had been popular among enemy fighters. He admitted that Marcus Webb had hired them to intimidate her into selling her garage. The plan had been to rough her up enough to convince her that refusing his offers would have serious consequences. Sarah continued her questioning, learning that Webb had described her as a divorced woman living alone who would be easy to frighten. He had apparently told them she was just a mechanic with no family nearby to protect her. The man seemed genuinely shocked to discover that their target was a combat veteran who had turned their own operation against them. As the interrogation continued, one of the unconscious men began to stir. Sarah watched him carefully as he slowly regained consciousness and tried to understand his situation. The confusion in his eyes turned to fear when he saw his leader zip-tied against the wall and Sarah sitting calmly with their weapons spread out before her. The newly awakened intruder tried to speak, but Sarah raised her hand for silence. She continued questioning the leader, learning more details about Webb's organization and how many other people he had used similar tactics against. The information painted a picture of a local businessman who had been operating like a crime boss, using intimidation and violence to get what he wanted. Sarah learned that her garage was not Webb's only target. He had been systematically pressuring several other small business owners to sell their properties at below-market prices. Those who refused had faced escalating harassment until they either gave in or left town entirely. Sarah's military background had not been part of Webb's intelligence gathering, which explained why he had so badly miscalculated this particular operation. The third man woke up during the middle of the conversation, adding to the surreal atmosphere of three tied-up intruders listening to their leader confess to a woman they had come to attack. Sarah noticed that both newly conscious men kept staring at their weapons on her coffee table, probably calculating their chances of somehow getting free and reaching them. Sarah asked about Webb's other associates and learned that he employed several groups like this one for different types of jobs. Some handled vandalism and property damage. Others specialized in financial pressure through fake lawsuits and bureaucratic harassment. This group had been brought in specifically for physical intimidation when other methods failed. The leader revealed that they had been watching her for several days, learning her routines and planning their approach. They had expected to find her asleep and defenseless, making their job quick and simple. Instead, they had walked into what felt like a carefully prepared trap, though Sarah had only had a few hours to prepare once she noticed their surveillance. As the interrogation wound down, Sarah had to decide what to do next. She had enough information to potentially bring down Webb's entire operation, but she also knew that involving the police might not guarantee justice. Small-town corruption was a real possibility, and Webb clearly had resources and connections that allowed him to operate with impunity until now. Sarah made her decision about how to handle the situation based on lessons learned during her military service. Sometimes the official channels were not enough to stop dangerous people, and sometimes you had to take more direct action to protect innocent people. She had the three intruders, their weapons, and their confessions, but she also had an opportunity to send a much stronger message. She retrieved her phone and took photos of the men, their weapons, and their identification cards. Then she called Detective Ray Chen, one of the few local police officers she trusted completely. Chen had served in the Marines before becoming a cop, and Sarah knew he would understand both the situation and her capabilities. Chen arrived within 20 minutes, and his expression shifted from concern to amazement as he surveyed the scene in Sarah's living room. Three armed intruders, professionally restrained and disarmed by a woman they had intended to intimidate. The evidence was overwhelming, and the men's confessions had been recorded on Sarah's phone. While Chen processed the scene and arrested the three men, Sarah shared her plan for dealing with Marcus Webb directly. She had learned enough about his organization to know that simply arresting these three would not stop him. He would just hire different people and continue his campaign of intimidation against other business owners. Chen listened carefully as Sarah outlined what she had learned about Webb's other victims and his systematic approach to forcing people out of business. The detective admitted that several complaints had been filed against Webb over the years, but nothing had ever stuck. He was careful to operate through intermediaries and had enough money to hire good lawyers when problems arose. Sarah proposed a different approach. Instead of just arresting the three intruders and hoping Webb would stop, she wanted to pay him a personal visit and deliver a message he would not forget. Chen understood the logic but had to warn her about the legal implications of taking matters into her own hands. The conversation was interrupted when the leader of the intruders, asked to speak privately with Sarah. He had been listening to their discussion and wanted to make a deal. In exchange for reduced charges, he was willing to provide detailed information about Webb's operations and testify against him in court. The man revealed that Webb had a safe in his office containing records of all his illegal activities, including payments to various groups for intimidation services. He also knew about planned operations against other business owners that were scheduled for the coming weeks. Most importantly, he had recordings of conversations with Webb that clearly showed the businessman ordering criminal acts. Sarah and Chen realized they had an opportunity to build a comprehensive case against Webb that could shut down his entire operation. However, the man also warned them that Webb was planning to leave town soon with a significant amount of cash, apparently aware that his activities were attracting too much attention. Sarah decided to modify her plan. Instead of just confronting Webb, she would use her military skills for reconnaissance and intelligence gathering. She could surveil his office and home, document his activities, and possibly locate the safe containing incriminating evidence. Chen could not officially support this plan, but he did not try to stop her either. The next morning, Sarah began her surveillance of Webb's operations. She used techniques learned during special operations missions to observe his office building without being detected. Webb appeared to be a man under pressure, making frequent phone calls and having tense conversations with associates who visited throughout the day. Sarah documented everything she observed, building a comprehensive picture of Webb's daily routine and security measures. His office was on the second floor of a building he owned, with minimal security beyond locked doors and a basic alarm system. She identified the best approach routes and escape paths, treating it like a military operation. That evening, Sarah noticed unusual activity around Webb's office building. Several men arrived after dark and began moving boxes to a van parked behind the building. Through her binoculars, Sarah could see Webb directing the operation and handling what appeared to be important documents and computer equipment. It became clear that Webb was accelerating his timeline for leaving town, probably spooked by the failure of his latest intimidation attempt. Sarah realized she had a narrow window of opportunity to gather the evidence needed to stop him permanently. The safe containing records of his criminal activities would likely be emptied within the next day or two. Sarah contacted Chen and informed him of the developments. They agreed that time was running out for a conventional investigation. Webb's apparent preparation to flee meant that any evidence would soon be destroyed or moved beyond their reach. Sarah prepared for what might be her most important mission since leaving the military. Sarah spent the day preparing for her mission to Webb's office, with the same methodical approach she had used for operations in Afghanistan. She studied the building's layout, identified security vulnerabilities, and planned multiple entry and exit routes. Her goal was to locate Webb's safe and document its contents before he could destroy the evidence. That evening, Sarah waited until Webb left his office building at his usual time around 7 o'clock. She had observed his patterns for 2 days and knew he typically did not return after leaving for the day. However, she also knew that desperate people change their routines, so she remained prepared for unexpected complications. Using skills learned during nighttime reconnaissance missions, Sarah approached the building from the rear where shadows provided natural concealment. The back entrance Webb had used for moving boxes was secured with a standard commercial lock that posed no challenge for someone with her training. She gained entry within minutes and began moving through the building. Webb's office was on the second floor at the end of a hallway lined with other small businesses that were closed for the evening. Sarah moved silently through the darkened building, using a small red-filtered flashlight that provided illumination without compromising her night vision. Every step was calculated to avoid detection by anyone who might be watching the building. The office door was secured with both a standard lock and a deadbolt, but Sarah had come prepared with the tools necessary to handle both. Her military training had included basic infiltration techniques, though she had never expected to use them in her hometown. Within 15 minutes, she was inside Webb's private office. The safe was exactly where the captured intruder had described it, built into the wall behind Webb's desk and concealed by a painting of the local mountains. Sarah examined the safe carefully, noting that it was a high-quality model with both digital and traditional lock mechanisms. This was going to require more than basic lock-picking skills. Fortunately, Sarah had anticipated this challenge and brought equipment appropriate for the task. She had acquired specialized tools during her military service that were designed for accessing secured containers when conventional methods were not available. The process would take time, but she was confident in her ability to open the safe. As Sarah worked on the safe, she remained alert for any sounds that might indicate Webb's unexpected return or the presence of security guards. The building remained quiet except for the normal settling sounds of an older structure. She had positioned herself so she could see the hallway through the office door, maintaining situational awareness while focusing on her task. The safe finally opened after nearly an hour of careful work. Inside, Sarah found exactly what the captured intruder had promised: detailed records of Webb's criminal activities spanning several years. There were contracts with various groups for intimidation services, records of payments made to corrupt officials, and most importantly, recordings of conversations where Webb explicitly ordered criminal acts. Sarah photographed everything in the safe using a high-resolution camera, making sure to capture clear images of documents and transcripts of recorded conversations. The evidence was overwhelming and would be more than sufficient to convict Webb and dismantle his entire organization. She also found records of other victims who had been too frightened to report their experiences to police. As she worked through the documents, Sarah discovered that Webb's operation was larger than anyone had suspected. He had been systematically targeting small business owners throughout the region, using intimidation and violence to acquire properties at below-market prices. The records showed a pattern of escalating harassment that had driven dozens of families from their homes and businesses. Sarah also found evidence that Webb had been planning to expand his operations to neighboring towns, using the profits from his forced acquisitions to fund larger and more sophisticated criminal activities. The recordings revealed discussions about bribing county officials and establishing relationships with organized crime groups in larger cities. One document particularly caught Sarah's attention: a hit list of business owners who had refused Webb's offers, with detailed plans for escalating pressure tactics. Her name was at the top of the list, with notes indicating that her military background had been discovered after the failed break-in at her house. Sarah realized that Webb now knew exactly who he was dealing with and would likely try to eliminate her before she could expose his operation. The failed intimidation attempt had turned into a much more dangerous situation, with Webb probably viewing her as an existential threat to his criminal enterprise. As Sarah finished photographing the evidence, she heard vehicles arriving outside the building. Through the office window, she could see Webb's car pulling into the parking lot along with two other vehicles carrying multiple men. Her intelligence had been wrong about his evening routine, and she was now trapped in his office with nowhere to hide. Sarah quickly closed the safe and moved to a position where she could observe the building entrance while remaining hidden from view. Webb and 6 men entered through the front door, their voices carrying up the stairwell as they discussed their plans to retrieve important documents before leaving town permanently. Sarah realized that her mission had just become significantly more complicated. Webb was directing his men to gather specific files and equipment while he personally handled the safe containing the most incriminating evidence. Sarah listened to their conversation from her concealed position, learning that they planned to destroy everything that could connect Webb to his criminal activities. After tonight, there would be no evidence left to prosecute him or help his victims. The men split up to handle different tasks throughout the building, with Webb heading directly to his office. Sarah had perhaps 2 minutes before he would discover that his safe had been accessed and the evidence photographed. She needed to escape the building immediately, but Webb's men were positioned to see anyone trying to leave through the main exits. Sarah moved to the office window and examined her options for escape. The building was 2 stories high, but there was a loading dock below that would break her fall if she could land properly. She had made similar jumps during combat operations, though usually with better equipment and backup support. Tonight, she was completely on her own. Webb's footsteps were approaching his office door when Sarah opened the window and prepared to jump. She could hear him talking on his phone about accelerating their timeline and dealing with a security breach. In moments, he would realize that someone had accessed his safe and photographed the contents. Sarah jumped from the window just as Webb entered his office and discovered the opened safe. His shouts of anger and alarm echoed through the building as she landed hard on the loading dock below. The impact knocked the wind out of her, but she forced herself to move immediately toward the cover of nearby trees. Webb's men were already spreading out to search for the intruder when Sarah reached the tree line. She could hear them calling to each other and see flashlight beams sweeping the area around the building. Her military training in evasion and escape took over as she moved through the darkness, putting distance between herself and her pursuers. Sarah made her way to her truck, which she had parked several blocks away as part of her operational planning. She could hear sirens in the distance and realized that Webb had probably called the police to report a break-in. She needed to reach Detective Chen immediately and provide him with the evidence before Webb could spin the situation to his advantage. Chen met Sarah at the police station, where she transferred all the photographed evidence to his secure systems. The documentation was comprehensive and devastating, showing clear evidence of racketeering, conspiracy, assault, and corruption that would easily result in significant prison time for Webb and his associates. Within hours, Chen had coordinated with state and federal authorities to begin arresting Webb's entire organization. The evidence Sarah had gathered provided the foundation for search warrants, asset seizures, and a comprehensive investigation that would dismantle the criminal enterprise completely. Webb was arrested at the airport the next morning, attempting to board a flight to a country with no extradition treaty. The cash and documents he was carrying provided additional evidence of his criminal activities and his attempt to flee prosecution. His arrest made headlines throughout the region and encouraged other victims to come forward with their stories. The three men who had broken into Sarah's house agreed to testify against Webb in exchange for reduced sentences. Their cooperation provided additional details about the organization's operations and helped authorities identify other criminal associates who had not been documented in Webb's records. Sarah's actions had not only protected herself but had also saved dozens of other small business owners from intimidation and violence. The evidence she gathered led to the recovery of millions of dollars in illegally acquired assets, much of which was returned to Webb's victims or used to fund community programs. Detective Chen recommended Sarah for a civilian commendation for her courage and investigative work. However, Sarah preferred to avoid public attention and returned to running her auto repair shop. The attempted intimidation had backfired completely, making her garage one of the most respected businesses in town and earning her the gratitude of the entire community. Webb was ultimately sentenced to 25 years in federal prison, and his criminal organization was permanently dismantled. The case became a model for other law enforcement agencies dealing with similar corruption and intimidation schemes. Sarah had proved that sometimes the best defense against bullies was someone who had been trained to fight back effectively. The small town of Cedar Falls returned to normal, but everyone now knew that their quiet auto mechanic was someone who would stand up to anyone who threatened innocent people. Sarah continued her peaceful life, though she remained vigilant and prepared for any future threats to her community or herself.